Hi, folks. It's been a couple of days since Charlie Kirk's assassination, and Democrats are still hard at work carrying water for the worst people in the world, bending over backwards to excuse political violence, and yes, even trying to pin Charlie's assassination on Charlie himself. You can't make up this level of moral gymnastics and relativism. It's like Cirque du Solipsism at this point. And you don't have to look any further than the despicable ghouls over at MSDNC who had the galaxy brain take that Charlie's so-called hate speech is what actually pulled the trigger. You won't believe this one.
Talk to me about the environment in which a shooting like this happens.
Climate change?
Yeah, and again, emphasize what you just emphasized. We don't know any of the full details of this. We don't know if this was a supporter shooting their gun off in celebration, or
what?
so we have no idea about this. But following up what was just said, he's been one of the most divisive, especially divisive younger figures in this.
Oh, it gets worse.
Who is constantly sort of pushing this sort of hate speech
it
or
gets
sort
even
of
worse.
aimed at certain
Oh
groups.
my God.
And I always go back to hateful thoughts lead to hateful words, which then lead to hateful actions.
Really,
And
dude?
I think that's the environment we're in.
Really,
that
dude?
People just, you can't stop with these sort of awful thoughts you have and then saying these awful words and not expect awful actions to take place. And that's the
You are
unfortunate
genuinely
environment.
awful. I mean, this goes beyond propaganda, folks. This is just straight up nonsense from the jump. The guy literally starts by saying, well, we don't know if it was a shooter or maybe it's just some supporter firing a gun in celebration, trying to pin this one on MAGA. Is this guy serious? First off, he's implicating Charlie Kirk's entire audience. The same, college-attending folks who've been attending his campus tours for years without a single violent gun incident. Zero. What evidence does this guy have that people go to Charlie's events armed and blasting rounds in the sky like Yosemite Sam? None. Zero. Zilch. This dude just concocted that picture out of thin air. And then he takes it even a step further, shamelessly trying to pin Charlie's own assassination on Charlie's words. Since when do we live in a country where simply voicing mainstream conservative positions, supporting life, deregulation, personal accountability, constitutional rights, suddenly that becomes a justification for murder? That's how far the Democrats' logic has gone, folks. It's insane and it's dangerous. This clip just gets progressively worse the more this man talks. You almost have to wonder if this guy even has a mouth left or just a hole for spewing garbage. And as if it couldn't get any worse, shortly after it was confirmed that Charlie had passed, Republicans in the House paused for a moment of silence. Then Representative Lauren Boebert from Colorado requested a moment of prayer for Charlie. And then this happened. Shh.
In a moment of prayer out loud for Charlie and his family.
Let's wait a minute. The House will be in order. The House will be in order.
Wow. This is who Democrats are, folks, and it's never been more obvious. They brand themselves as a party of empathy, compassion, and all these warm little woke feelings. But at the end of the day, they hate you. They hate anybody who isn't in their tribe. They want you silenced, buried, and forgotten, and then they'll spit on your grave by refusing even a prayer. Think about that for a second, folks. Congress spends hours every day on speeches, procedural nonsense, and partisan games, but a 30-second prayer for Charlie Kirk, who was just assassinated, that's just too much. And the irony is staggering because right there behind the speaker's chair, in giant letters, it says, "In God we trust." This nation's very foundation rests on Christian principles. Our rights are not government-given, they're God-given. And the Constitution exists to protect those unalienable rights from government intrusion. Yet if we can't even honor someone's life with a simple prayer in the House of Representatives without Democrats shrieking, "No!" then what are we living in? We're living in a crumbling republic, a nation dissolving from within, unable to agree even on how to acknowledge God in our most sacred civic space. It's both unbelievable and disgusting. Anyway, folks, as always, it just gets sicker because Democrats don't know how to stop. Shortly after all of that, President Trump released a statement from the Oval Office honoring Charlie Kirk's memory while also calling out the unhinged, inflammatory rhetoric coming from Democrats, the same people who spent the last few years smearing Republicans as fascists and Nazis, casually comparing us to some of the most evil regimes in human history. And then leave it to Jen Psaki over at MSDNC she somehow twists that into, you guessed it, blaming Trump for escalating the situation. I mean, only in Democrat logic does honoring an assassined man become incitement.
He put out a 4-minute video, and I'm not going to play the video. I don't want to play the video. But there was a line at the end that I think I just wanted to raise and read. At the end of this 4-minute video, he says, "For years, those on the radical left have compared wonderful Americans like Charlie to Nazis and the world's worst mass murderers and criminals. This kind of rhetoric is directly responsible for the terrorism that we're seeing in our country today, and it must stop right now."
Yeah, you've done that.
And obviously, there's a lot of rhetoric that is problematic. A lot of it is coming from one particular side and from one particular building. But what can be done? I fear when this is an escalation already in less than 24 hours of this shooting.
Now, it was obvious from the start that Psaki was going to run with a dishonest framing here. She sets it up by saying, oh, I can't play this 4-minute video. I can't provide the full context of Trump's words. They're too mean, too evil, too bad. And instead, she just cherry picks a single line so she can twist it into her narrative. What an awful, disgusting human being. What a genuinely dishonest propagandist. Democrats have been calling Republicans Nazis for years, smearing conservatives as if they're the worst monsters in history. And yet, here's Psaki, basically Joseph Goebbels in a pantsuit, acting like Trump himself is the one inciting violence. Let's be clear, folks. Somebody literally just died. Trump is trying to honor Charlie and call out the rhetoric that fuels this kind of volatile political environment. And Jen takes zero accountability. Instead, she strips the context, flips the blame, and uses it as an attack on Republicans and Trump. That is how shameless this game has become for Democrats. And speaking of scraping the bottom of the barrel, here's Ilhan Omar being the worst person you know.
What I do know for sure is that, Charlie was someone who once said, guns save lives after a school shooting. Charlie was someone who was willing to debate and downplay the death of George Floyd in the hands of Minneapolis police.
I think he called him a scumbag.
Right, have no regard, downplay slavery and what Black people have gone through in this country by saying Juneteenth should never exist. And I think there are a lot of people who are out there talking about him just wanting to have a civil debate.
Complete rewriting of history.
Yeah, there is nothing more
Dude literally just sat at college campuses and talked.
Than to completely pretend that his words and actions have not been recorded and in existence.
Exactly, that's exactly what
for the
you're
last
doing.
Decade or so.
The irony of Ilhan Omar grinning through her teeth while using Charlie's death as a platform to push gun control is staggering. She tries to claim his words on the Second Amendment somehow justify his assassination, then pivots to completely rewriting history, pretending that because Charlie questioned the narrative around George Floyd or opposed making Juneteenth a federal holiday, his life had less value. That's not accountability. That's straight up vindictiveness masquerading as virtue. And here's the kicker. Omar accuses others of rewriting history while doing it herself in real time. Folks, Charlie stood for American principles: free speech, individual liberty, faith, and self-determination. And the fact that we now have two foreign-born figures in this video, Ilhan Omar and Mehdi Hasan, sitting in America, enjoying every blessing this country has given them, and using the death of an American patriot to sneer and laugh on national television is disgraceful. This is who Democrats are, by the way. An anti-American party that long ago traded patriotism for globalism. And as someone who is a first-generation American, who grew up in Brazil, and who saw firsthand what socialism and corruption do to nations, I came here because I love America for what it is, not to turn it into the shithole that Brazil is. That's why I respect Charlie Kirk. He embodied the principles that make this country great. And the sight of Democrats mocking that ultimate sacrifice that he paid should tell you everything about where the Democrat loyalties really lie.
How do we fix this? This is a persistent problem. Are there answers?
The answer is not to allow the hateful rhetoric to find the audience that it finds. I mean, one of Charlie's last tweets that I read was a video clip of him. I think in that clip he talked about you and said, Muslims are like bringing an ideology and teaming up with trans and like socialists.
And there you have it, folks. This is exactly what Democrats want. They want to shut you up. And now Charlie's assassination is being used as the excuse. So the message is clear. If you don't want to die, then maybe stop talking. Or better yet, hand it over to government officials the right to decide what you can and can't say so they can determine whether you're safe, depending on your speech, of course. That's not how America works, folks. That's not free speech, and that's authoritarianism dressed up as compassion. And by the way, Charlie was absolutely right about everything he said, and history proves it. Just look at Iran in 1979. The left teamed up with Islamic extremists to overthrow the Shah. They dissolved the cultural foundation of the country, exactly the same kind of alliance you see between the left and radical Islam today, and the same dynamics we're watching spread across the West. And what happened in Iran after the revolution, you ask? Well, the Islamists murdered the very leftists who helped them seize power and turn the country into the theocracy we now know. Charlie was just pointing to the facts, and that was too much for Ilhan Omar. Instead of engaging with reality, she reduces everything to a broken record talking point, saying, because she can't or won't think beyond the narrative.
When it comes to an attack, whether it is a school shooting or a shooting in a movie theater or, a politician gets shot up, they are quick to make the assumption of who the shooters are.
Yes.
While we sit there and try to talk about, solutions, try to talk about, the family.
Gun control. But nobody wants to talk about gun control.
Have a rational conversation. They want to point the finger because to them, they don't really care about the life that is lost. It's about who I can demonize.
What?
Yes.
And that demonization is what leads to lives being taken. And I want them to realize that they can't continue to set the fires that end up consuming them and cry about it.
Absolutely, thoroughly dishonest. Once again, Ilhan Omar uses tragedy to pivot straight into gun control. And let me be clear, this is not going to be about gun control, nor should it ever be. To take someone's death and immediately weaponize it for policy is ghoulish enough. But the policies that she and the Democrats push aren't even serious solutions. They're about control, expanding government power, and stripping away constitutionally guaranteed freedoms that millions of Americans cherish. There's never any nuance with these guys, never any respect for liberty. It's always the same tired line. You don't know how to handle your guns, so we're gonna take them for you because we're the government and we know better. And then on top of that, she flips the script and blames Republicans, accusing us of rushing to judgment or somehow inciting the very violence we suffer from. Let me tell you, if you honestly think Republicans are out here assassinating the very people we admire, then you're either a fool or you're just enjoying playing one on television. Because the reality is crystal clear, and in fact, so evident that it points directly to the actual killer and the ideology behind him. Because it has now been confirmed, folks, that this is Charlie Kirk's assassin. His name is Tyler Robinson, a 22-year-old from Utah, now in custody after being turned in by his own father, a longtime sheriff's deputy who did the right thing in this case. Robinson confessed to a family member after the shooting, and investigators matched him on surveillance video arriving at Utah Valley University the morning of the event in a gray Dodge Challenger. Charlie was shot around 12:20 p.m. in front of nearly 3,000 people. The rifle used in the attack was later recovered wrapped in a towel near the campus. And here's where it gets chilling. Robinson had engraved messages on the bullet casings, including "Hey Fascist," "Catch," and "Bella Ciao," a leftist anthem from World War II, and even crude internet memes mocking sexuality. This wasn't random. It was steeped in the Antifa-style rhetoric Democrats have been mainstreaming for over a decade, casually branding Republicans as fascists and Nazis. You know, that language matters, folks. It radicalizes unstable people like this dude. it fuels violence. And in this case, it culminated in the assassination of one of the most prominent conservative voices in America. The fact pattern here is absolutely undeniable. This is far left ideology, online radicalization, and a cultural climate where Democrats normalize the very hatred that now spills into real bloodshed. And in case you're skeptical and you need some evidence of that, well, let's just rewind the tape back to the election when Kamala Harris said this on CNN.
Let me ask you tonight, do you think Donald Trump is a fascist?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
And there you have it, folks. Kamala Harris coming through and proving the point, because Democrats have relied on this honest tactic of framing Republicans as fascists for years. She said it herself, flat out on a global stage. She said, yes, I do think Donald Trump is a fascist. And that kind of rhetoric doesn't just disappear into thin air. It trickles down through the entire Democrat apparatus, their media allies, and into academia until it becomes the default language of the left. I mean, I saw this myself firsthand just yesterday at USC. I went out there with a friend to debate some students, and we had a sign that said Charlie Kirk was right, because he was on a lot of things. And one of those students flat out called me a fascist at one point. So I asked him to explain what fascism actually means. His answer, well, it's the control of the means of production by the state. And then he tacked on with an ethno-nationalist backdrop. And I said, well, what about me suggests that I support any of that? I own a business. I believe in private enterprise. I've never once advocated for an ethno-state or even a theocracy. In fact, both positions are inherently anti-Christian. And let's be honest, the Republican Party in California is about as far from an ethno-nationalist movement as you can get. It's majority Hispanic, Indian, Armenian, Jamaican, you name it. It's literally more diverse than the Democrat Party. White people are basically the minority in the California GOP, and there are more gay white men in leadership than straight ones. To slap the label fascist on that is absurd, dishonest, and deeply dangerous. And that's the point I made to this student. Your rhetoric is the same kind of rhetoric that justified Charlie Kirk's assassination. Because once you convince yourself that someone is a fascist, history gives you a ready-made moral script. Fascists are mass murderers. Fascists caused millions of deaths. So if you believe I'm a fascist or that Charlie was one, then you can rationalize violence against you as self-defense. That's dehumanization in its purest form. And let's trace that back to the source, because we just watched this presidential candidate, Kamala Harris, on a global stage, flatly calling Trump a fascist. Folks, Donald Trump is the opposite of a fascist. He's a business owner. Supporting private enterprise is the complete opposite of fascism, which is centralizing the means of production under state control. Ironically, that definition fits socialism better than what Trump or the Republican Party are. Trump's not an ethno-nationalist either. His cabinet has included leaders from every background, from Kash Patel to Ben Carson. To call him a fascist is baseless, but it's also strategic. It's a weaponized label Democrats use to inflame emotions, to shut down debate, and to make conservatives seem like existential threats. And when that rhetoric gets repeated by the media, echoed in classrooms, and normalized in culture, it only takes one unstable person to take it literally and do the unthinkable. That's how you end up with someone like Tyler Robinson engraving "Hey Fascist" on his bullet casings before murdering, publicly assassinating Charlie Kirk. Words have consequences, folks, and Democrats know exactly what they're doing when they use them in this inflammatory manner. Look, folks, yesterday I said that we had crossed the Rubicon, and we have. We've passed the point of no return. And Democrats refuse to take accountability for their words, for the dehumanizing way they speak about Republicans. And instead of pulling back, they're doubling down. They're digging their heels in. And they're making this an absolutely unnecessary fight. But here's the truth. Every Republican I know just wants this country to be better. We want you to have more money in your pocket. We want your kids safe in school, not told by strangers that they're the wrong gender or pushed into conversations about sex. We want you to have personal freedom, the freedom to build your own business without government strangling you, the freedom to keep more of what you earn through lower taxes, the freedom to speak your mind, defend yourself, and worship as you choose. That's what the Constitution guarantees. And that document, anchored in law, order, and a Christian ethic of work and life, is what made America great and what keeps it great. The other side doesn't care about any of that. They pay lip service to you while working to strip those freedoms away from you. And if you think they'll treat you any differently than they're treating us, you're gravely mistaken. Try disagreeing with them and see what happens. Anyway, folks, thank you so much for watching. Tell me what you think in the comments down below. Have a terrific day. Peace.